Another young black man shot and killed by police. I'm talking about 26-year-old Jamel Robertson, who was working security at a Chicago area bar, I should say, because it wasn't specifically in Chicago. But witnesses say that security asked several drunk men to leave the bar, and at least one person opened fire. Robertson pinned the alleged gunman to the ground. But moments later, a white police officer arrived and shot Robertson. The Illinois State Police now investigating the shooting. They released a preliminary report saying, in part, upon his arrival at a Midlothian police officer encountered a subject in plain black clothing with no markings, readily identifying him as a security guard armed with a gun in the west parking lot. According to witness statements, the Midlothian officer gave the armed subject multiple verbal commands to drop the gun and get on the ground before ultimately discharging his weapon and striking the subject. But tonight, the police chief is grieving Robertson's death, calling it the equivalent of a blue-on-blue friendly fire incident. Chief Daniel Delaney also wrote on Facebook, "What we have learned is Jamel Robertson was a brave man who was doing his best to end an active shooter situation at Manny's Blue Room. The Midlothian Police Department is completely saddened by this tragic incident, and we give our heartfelt condolences to Jamel, his family, and his friends. There are no words that can be expressed as to the sorrow his family is dealing with." Let's discuss now. Joining me now is Lee Merritt. He's the attorney for Jamel Robertson's family, and also Avantier Booth. She is the mother of Jamel Robertson's 9-year-old son. Good evening, 9-year-old son. I think you, yeah. I'm sorry, 9 months. Sorry about that. Good evening to both of you. I'm so sorry. Avantier, the loss is unbelievable. By all accounts, Jamel was a wonderful person, bright future, the father of your baby boy, Tristan. And now this tough time for you. How are you holding up?
I'm hurting. I'm sad.
Go on. What do you want the world to know about how you're feeling?
My baby's not going to have his father for Christmas, his birthday, any holidays anymore because a police officer took his life from him. And it's hurting real bad.
I read the response from the police department. What do you say to that, Avantier?
I guess want the police officer to get his badge taken away.
Yeah. It's one thing down for them to give that lip service to say that this was a blue on blue shooting. It was friendly fire. But there's nothing friendly about it to this family. They want to see justice. And so to say that they're sad and that they're hurting, but to still employ this police officer who was in a situation that we don't believe deadly force was necessary. And mind you, the other officers who were also there on the scene, they didn't believe deadly force was necessary because they didn't use it. And so it's one thing to sympathize with the family. It's actually something completely different to take tangible steps towards justice, and they haven't done that yet. Something Avantier didn't have a chance to mention earlier is not only is her 9-month-old son going to be without his father, they just learned 10 days ago that they're expecting, and so she's pregnant with Jamel's second child, and he won't be able to see her through that.
Oh my goodness. So let's talk about the police department turning this investigation over to the Illinois State Police Public Integrity Task Force because it was an officer-involved shooting. You heard their statement. They say that Jamel was in plain black clothing. He was given commands to drop his weapon. You disagree with that finding.
Yeah. And Avantier can sort of bring some light to that subject, but what the witnesses say, the people who were there at this scene, they say that he was, not only was he marked 3 times over with a black cap that said security in white letters, a vest that said security on it, and a coat that said security on it in white letters, but people were around and they were watching him subdue this would-be mass shooter, and they were screaming, "He is a security officer," as the police were shouting commands at him. But before he had an opportunity to react, This officer escalated the situation to a deadly force situation. And what we see in Jamel is what we expect from law enforcement. We expect them to come into a situation and assess and take in all the facts before escalating the deadly force. If Jamel had been a police officer and he had witnessed someone fire into a crowd like the suspect that he apprehended did, he would have been just heroic by shooting the suspect. Jamel was almost like a superhero in the sense that he not only was able to apprehend the suspect, but he even preserved his life. And to see the exact opposite of that thoughtful efforts to preserve human life, to see law enforcement officers just come out and say, well, he didn't respond to our commands. And mind you, what you don't hear, even according to their facts, they don't say, and then he made a threatening motion or there was something that he did to put other people's lives in danger. They said he failed to comply quick enough. And so we escalated to deadly force, and we killed this hero and this community champion. It's just really tragic.
Avantier, I want you to respond to this because I think it's a very cruel irony is that Jamel wanted to be a police officer and he's lost his life doing what what police officers do, and that's trying to protect others.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
He's a protector of everybody. Anybody he knew, he got close to, he was a protector.
What do you want people to know, Avantier?
We want justice for Jamel and his family.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
We'll be right back. So here's what the NRA says, that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But 26-year-old Jamel Robertson was a good guy with a gun, and he was still shot and killed by a police officer. So I want to discuss now with Wes Lowry of the Washington Post. Wes, good evening. Of course, our hearts go out to that young lady and her entire family. I'm sure you heard some of the interview there. It's just awful. So Jamel was that good guy with a gun. He was the hero in this story, and yet he was killed. What does that say?
Of course, you know, as we've had this conversation, and you and I have had it, and we've had it on the air at CNN and other places, there's been a conversation for a long time about what do we do about mass shootings, about the idea that people can walk into a place, be it a bar, a church, a restaurant, and open fire. And one thing that some groups, the NRA included, has advocated is that if only you were to put more, quote, good guys with guns out there. We've heard that the president has advocated this as well at schools and in other places. This question of if you had someone there with a gun to stop them, perhaps it would stop these mass shootings. What many people, civil rights organizations, many activists have noted is that, well, what happens when the police show up and they see that good guy with a gun? That seems to be what happened here. Here you had a black man who was doing his job. He was working as a security guard and had to pull the gun that he owned legally and carried legally to subdue a threat. And when the police arrived, what they saw was a black man with a gun, and they shot and killed him.
Yeah. I have to say this. Robertson had a valid firearm owner's identification card, was licensed by the state to work armed security. Do you think black folks who legally carry guns risk becoming targets in a scenario like this?
Well, certainly, we know what we know about the way that black men and black women are perceived in our society. We know about the kind of stereotypical feelings and views of us as dangerous, as potentially threatening. We know that if someone happens upon a black man holding a gun, they're more likely to see them as a perpetrator as opposed to perhaps a police officer or a security guard. We've heard countless stories over the years of black police officers themselves being at times, you know, at crime scenes detained by their own colleagues who don't necessarily believe that they themselves are the police. And so what we see here is that we know when a black man has a gun, be it legal or not, there's a likelihood, be it from a police officer or anyone else, that they're going to be seen more likely as a threat, right? And so we think about shootings like that of Philando Castile or of John Crawford with a toy gun in a Walmart near Cincinnati, cases where these men were not doing anything wrong, nothing illegal, and yet they were still seen as a threat and ended up losing their lives.
The state police preliminary report says it shows that Jamel was told multiple times to drop the weapon and that he wasn't wearing clothes that identified him as a security guard. What do you make of that? People say otherwise.
Certainly, and it's really early, and what we know, having covered a lot of these shootings and these types of incidents before, is that very often those initial police reports are based solely on the account of perhaps the officer who pulled the trigger, and so it's going to be very interesting to see what these witness accounts say, if there's any video perhaps of what has gone on. We know that these early police accounts very often follow a very specific script, and that script almost always includes, well, this person was instructed clearly multiple times. And what we know, obviously we don't know what we don't know in this case, but what we know is in many cases when the police claim that to be true, it isn't always necessarily. And either way, what we saw in the statement you put up earlier is that even the police themselves are acknowledging that this was a man who was doing his job, in fact had been a hero in this incident, and found himself on the wrong end of a police shooting.
I have just a short amount of time left. So, Wes, I got to ask you, this bar, Manny's Blue Room, is located in a predominantly black Chicago suburb of Robbins, Illinois. Midlothian police, that's who responded. So most of the folks there, including the employees, would be black. What are the main differences in policing in black communities versus white neighborhoods, and how does that pertain to this case?
Of course. In this case, you know, there's this question of who are the police and how do they relate to the community they're in. Is this an area that has a lot of crime, where there's difficulty here? Are the police going to be more suspicious of this man who they're coming across? And what we know is that there are, you know, just historic rifts between police and black and brown communities, and it's unclear, you know, to what extent that might have been a role here as well.
Yeah. Wes, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Don.
And thank you for watching.